Hello, I'm Will Yeoman, and welcome to another episode of the Pod Well Travelled and or Pod Street, depending on where you're listening and who you are. We're recording today from New Norcia, which is pretty exciting. This is where we have our annual, well, it's a workshop weekend, but it's much more than that. We've got photography, we've got writing, and we've got what we call the travel experience. So for those of you who are sitting at home listening, we hope we can bring a lot of that to you in your living room today. It's my pleasure to present Stephen Scourfield, who is travel editor at the West Australian. He's a travel writer and photographer with more than 40 years' experience, an award-winning novelist and accomplished spoken word performer. Stephen's books include the novels Other Country, which won the West Australian Premier's Book Award for Fiction, and As the River Runs, the novella collection Unaccountable Hours, and travel books such as Isolation, Don't Forget to Write, and Beautiful Witness. Stephen, welcome to the two pods.
The two pods. The pod eye. Thank you, Will. What an introduction. What do I say? One of the great writers said there's an introduction that my father would have enjoyed and my mother would have believed. So
I haven't heard that one before, but I like it.
Yeah.
Can I use it?
Please do, yeah.
Thank you. So look, one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is that your field of activity is so varied, as we've said in the introduction: spoken word performer, photographer, novelist, travel writer. I'm just wondering how you arrived at this point. This is probably going to require a reasonably long answer, but how did you get to this point where you are so accomplished in so many different fields?
Well, I'll try and keep it abbreviated. I think that comes from, to some extent, from the very roots of my writing as a professional. I was a kid who was always going to be a writer, so I have in my drawer at home books that I wrote and stapled together and made and drew covers on and goodness knows what else. So I have all that. So it was always going to happen is the first part of it. But then and it's very important to me and to say to the writers here, I mean, I don't think of myself as a travel writer. I don't think of myself as a novelist particularly. I think of myself as a writer applying myself to whatever it is. And certainly the early part of my career, which is so formative for us all, I was really aware of filling the toolbox, with as many tools as I could, so that I could write for motorcycle magazines or travel magazines, or I could write profiles. I spent a lot of time with people who were very famous writing in-depth profiles for London magazines. I did fashion, you name it. So, and I was writing fiction, I was writing poetry stuff. As you say, I've written scripts for dance companies. And I think it's a good thing to think about, to say and to think about for the writers here, particularly because if you have all these tools and you have all these techniques and styles and tricks, dare I say, that you can draw upon, they can be you can open a drawer like a mechanic and get out whichever socket set fits to apply to that style of writing. And even within a publication that's relevant, because if you're writing, you have, on one end of the scale you have information, on the other end of the scale you have inspiration. On that previous end of the scale you have the practical in travel writing, and on the other end of the scale you have the poetic. I mean, I think I end up in the white noise in the middle a fair bit of the time. But this is to say that if you're writing something that's very practical, if I'm writing something about the visa situation for India, which is quite a flexible beast at the moment, and I have advice for that, I just want to be really clear. If I'm writing about travel insurance, I want to be really clear, and your implications are you covered for this, that, and the other thing. That practical information, I'm going to open the drawer which has got that set of spanners in, and I want to be really clear and practical in how I advise people, because I know that people act upon that. If I'm standing on a street corner in Jaipur for 4 hours, which I was recently, and writing a poetic piece, I don't want to bother myself with mechanical stuff. I want to just let it go. Sitting in the back of a bus, just writing what's going past the window. So that's more like the script form which we'll perform, which we perform together will. So, my answer is that get yourself a massive toolbox and fill it up, because then you can write fiction and then you can interplay. So, one of the jokes in my life is my suitcase called Casey, which some of you might have heard of. Casey was born out of desperation one Christmas. So the end of the year, the thing that happens at the end of the year is that travel editors write, a review, what happened this year, a kind of review of the year. It's an annual thing that you're sort of expected to do. And I got to this late, just to say that, because I'm dare I say, everything I say today with humility, please, because I'm a practiced writer and I've been doing this a long time, I've got days scheduled in right through this year which are writing days. So I will write an India guide on Friday, whatever it is, and I've actually got those in my diary, and I'll turn up on that day and write 3,500, 4,000 words on India or whatever it is, or Africa or something. Once again, that comes back to having the tools. So with Casey, I was writing this year in review, and I literally sat down to write it a little bit late on my schedule and wrote, the year began with a new suitcase, let's call it Casey. And that was when Casey was born. And then from then on, Casey and I went to Africa, and of course, Casey hates Africa. Casey hates dust and dirt, but he loves France and, clawfoot baths and marble tops and all the things that, might pass me by. So Casey becomes this alter ego very quickly in this first little story. And I thought it was a one-off joke, and that was it. And then, of course, Christmas cards turn up for Casey, and Christmas presents turn up for Casey, and And it was very much the readers who I thought that was it, The readers adopted Casey and liked Casey. And go, and whenever I turn up, go, have you brought Casey? You go, well, no, it's a suitcase, In fact, Casey is here. But anyway, so Casey started to develop as a character. That is really a novelist's technique, characterization and an alter ego, an interplay between, someone who likes it.
Is there the danger, though, that your creation becomes more popular than you are?
It's happened. There's no doubt about that. And people will say, you haven't written about Casey. Is Casey all right? You haven't written about Casey lately. Yeah, there is. But, so the point is that that's just in the same way that Ace and Billy are created in other country, Casey is created in the travel pages. So if you've not only got this toolbox, but if you're in control of it, you can use this socket set on this thing because you can get away with it because you know how to get away with it. So that's my point in that answer, I suppose. I do have, because we're all using carry-on now, I do have a smaller version of Casey, a carry-on which is called Justin. So just in case, right? But I haven't introduced him properly to the pages yet because I think one joke's probably enough at the moment.
You're already, swamped by the popularity of Casey. You don't want Casey and Justin competing for your affections with the readership, presumably.
The slightly nerve-wracking thing about Casey is that he's become slightly real to me as well. I was staying in a very small hotel and there was just a double bed in the bedroom. There wasn't any room to put the case. I don't actually unpack, you see. So Casey has actually got this structure inside and things because I don't unpack because I'm moving every night, So I used to, when I was young, you say I'm in a different bed every night and it sounded quite exciting, but now it's just exhausting. So I don't unpack Casey. So I'd put it on the bed next to me and then I lie on the double bed, go to bed, and we're lying there together and I thought, this feels a bit awkward. So then I put a pillow between us. I thought, well, that's even weirder, it is a suitcase. So Casey has become slightly more real to me.
Right, well, that's quite troubling. Anyway, I think we'll move on from this.
I'll move on from Casey. So it's an image that will be hard to shake.
Just before we actually also move on from that aspect of building a toolbox, I'm really interested to know how one acquires that set of tools because obviously there's the school of thought where you just do it, you just get on with it and do it, and there's the other school of thought where you have a series of exercises that you set yourself, and those of us in the writing groups have been going through a series of such exercises, and this applies equally to photography. And I know that you and Mogens are great believers in creating sets on various themes and so forth. So if someone's just starting out, how do you actually acquire these tools?
Read and write. I'm sure you've been saying that in your tutorials all morning. Read and write. We've all got formative voices, styles in our heads, I'm sure, that echo there. So draw on those, draw on your natural instincts. I mean, I grew up, or my early writing was influenced by, Dylan Thomas's poetry and Undermilk Wood and that lyrical Welsh style of storytelling. But then I was interested in sort of that sparse and Norwegian style of writing, Knut Hamsun and so on. So, I mean, I'm sure you will have all of these characters, these writers in your minds too that influence you. And mimic them, write in that style, practice. I mean, it sounds unkind, but I'll say it. So when people say to me, I want to be a travel writer, I'm going to send you a travel story. And I always say to them, don't send me your travel story, send me your 10th travel story, if you're serious. Because I don't expect anyone to go and play a test match for Australia if they haven't been in the nets hitting a few balls, So how are you going to do, first off, how are you going to write a fantastic travel story? That if you're serious, let's start writing every day. I mean, I write fiction every day for myself because I love it, and even though the travel thing is like 60 hours a week, I still write fiction for myself every day just to keep it running and to keep that skill set going, I suppose, and to keep that voice running, because it's practice. So, if you're interested in the performance scripts, write stuff and read it out loud, record it on your phone, listen to it back, just for yourself, be critical.
Just on that point, I was going to ask you, and I know you have addressed this in the past, but there's a real sense that your writing has changed as a result of your spoken word performance.
Better or worse?
No, better, of course, without question.
Hesitation,
and that's possibly also tied to the greater use of the iPhone too, as a notebook.
Yeah. It is an interesting point, actually, Will. Does the mechanical method of writing affect the end? The style. I don't like the word product. The style.
The style.
Thanks. Yeah. I nearly slipped into a horrible vernacular there. I've always been so keen to police myself that it doesn't matter whether you're writing on a napkin or a typewriter or a MacBook or a phone or whatever it is, that it doesn't matter. And I sort of vaguely hold true to that. But I do see the influence of the mechanical means of writing. And as you say, so much of my creative writing now is to do with spoken word performances, working with Will, who plays guitar with them, working with a composer, musician called Steve Richter. So I write for those into a teleprompter. So everything's at a set speed. The reason for that is that I can record that and send it to Will or send it to Steve, for example, as a sound file, and it will always be at that speed. So when I stand up and read it on the teleprompter, it's at the same speed as they've been listening or rehearsing or composing to. And it's a very different style of writing because it is just like a long, thin 3-4 word, strip. I'll show any of you want to see. It's on the phones. What I then do is sync up all the phones. So when I stand on stage for, several hours reading this stuff in bits, people think I've remembered it all. It's fantastic. But I haven't. So that does influence it. And I do write the travel now, so much of it, the bulk of it, on the phone. So I have a file system set up just in Notes on my iPhone. And within that folder, which will say India 2023, I've got a research folder and a writing folder. And I'll be sitting in the back of a bus coming out of Jaipur, just writing what's going past me. What's quite fun when I travel with groups of readers is that after an hour or so, I'll then go to the front and read it to them. They go, oh, "We've just seen all that." And it is the detail that makes it, the signs and the things. And all these things, I just saw that. But you, as a traveller, you haven't got that because it's, the next thing's happening and you're going to lunch and you're doing this and that. And it's those bits of detail. So I find that writing, I call it writing in real time, just sitting there writing what's happening coming past you it's terribly exciting. I love it. But wow, you get this richness to it. I cannot recreate later. Having said that, I still use a notebook, shorthand, and I'm rock solid at 120 words a minute and slightly shakier at 140. So I still use that as a selective note, particularly in quoting people. So I'm not throwing out the bathwater with the baby, as the saying goes.
Just in relation to this use of technology and the way that it might influence your writing, one of the biggest shifts we've seen is from print to digital. And there's been a lot happening in that space, especially in newspapers. So I'm wondering to what extent you have had to modify the way you work as a journalist.
Yeah, really quite different. It's good question, Will, as they say. Good question in that print for us as a travel supplement is absolutely blockbuster. I mean, as we record this in April 2024, we have never produced more printed pages than we are at the moment. It's just, go figure. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I was sort of getting my rocking chair ready. So print is blockbuster, which is very interesting because particularly if you look at travel as a business category, as we call it, it's completely digital, really, that you can look for tours, ideas, book flights, all on your phone. No one needs to go to print for inspiration or information. So the fact that we have such success is really interesting. Everyone here probably should understand also that the success of that is driven to a large extent by advertising. That companies advertise in those pages and they pay a lot of money to advertise in those pages. And companies which pay a lot of money are very, very careful at monitoring their return on investment. And they come back week after week because they make a lot more money than they invest in it. So the multiplier for them might be 4 or 7 times, that if you spent $10,000 on an advertisement, you want to make 70,000 net. They monitor not only phone calls, but conversions and yield and who's bought what and everything else. So they're very specific. I only mention that, it's relevant to us writers because that comes from people reading it. If no one's reading it, that's not going to happen. So it is interactive, and it is important to us as writers that the readers are engaged. Business colleagues will tell us that trust is the great commodity. It's a frightening little coupling of words. That trust is a great commodity. It's a commercial commodity these days. We don't think about it like that. We just take the responsibility for what we do and hope that trust comes from that. With consistency, all those words are really important to me, and hopefully to you as writers. Consistency, trust, responsibility. For all of that I've just said, I never forget, and I don't want anyone to ever forget, that reading and writing is a personal connection between two people. That's all it is. We've just been talking about print, mass media, hundreds of thousands of readers, blah, blah, blah. But, and you can be misled into thinking of that as a kind of weird group amorphous activity. Or you can think of yourself as a writer finishing your writing and you put in a folder and it's finished. It's not. the writing only counts when someone reads it, when there's two people in that moment, you know, because that's between you and me. That's why I write in present tense, often in first person, every day. So once you're in present tense, the reader is there with you in that moment. I am in Madagascar at the turning of the bones where the animists get out their ancestors one day every 7 years, and it's happening now, and I'm writing it in the present tense, and you're there with me. If I write that in the past tense, I was invited to come to the turning of the bones one day every 7 years. I saw this, I saw that, I saw. There's a danger even that it becomes, you know, certainly it's sold to you, it's sort of third hand to you, you know, it's passed on to you as something that I've experienced, I'm now going to tell you about. And I almost feel that can be kind of derogatory. It's removing you from the experience, and I've been terribly important and lucky because I've seen this thing. Now I'm going to tell you all about it. You know, I mean, I'd rather write in the present tense because then we're standing there together. They're doing what? You know, they're getting these things out and dancing with them, you know. So present tense is kind of the crux of it, I think, for me in travel writing. It's very difficult because, sorry, Will.
No, please.
Just one difficult thing is that if you're on a trip for 2 weeks, say, and you're writing a travel story about the whole 2 weeks, the sub-editors who sub-edit and check our work, and it goes through all the old processes before anything gets to print. It's a struggle for them because they'll say, well, what was the moment? Which is the present tense? And you go, well, all of it is. You go, well, the Tuesday of last week can't be the same as the Friday of this week. You go, yes, it is, because we're still there in the present tense. And we saw this on the Tuesday and we're there, and this on the Thursday, and this, and on Friday we're doing this. And going, but what was the moment? You go, it's all the moment. So it's kind of a stretch. And it is something to get used to as a writer because you stay in the present tense all the time because you're always in the moment. So try that one. It's good fun. But stay in the present tense and you connect the reader.
I'm really interested. It's like the eternal present, isn't it? A bit like long haul flight. I'm interested in, just to offer a counterexample, I'm assuming this pertains mainly to travel writing because if one thinks of the vast majority of the masterpieces of the past, I'm talking about literary masterpieces, they're all written in the past tense. So I'm very interested to hear your opinion on that.
They are, but you want to try fiction in the present tense. It has a dynamic that is, well, firstly, yes, it feels unusual, reads unusual, because of what you've just said, Will. And it's difficult because you do lapse. You find you suddenly lapse, but it is possible. And I've got novellas written in the present tense, and I think it's pretty exciting.
Stephen and I have slightly different opinions on this. Let me just say that right now, if I read another new novel that's written in the present tense, I'm going to kill myself because I feel like it's actually become old news.
Really? That's very interesting.
No, I'm trying to be upfront with you. I'm not holding back here. I'm saying to you, I disagree strongly with your analysis of this.
Right, that's interesting. That's interesting because I don't read that much that is. I mean, you because of your position as chief of everything at Writing WA, and, demigod and whatever it is. I don't know what the title is. It's a long business card. You'd see more of that than I do. That's what I'm saying.
That's probably true.
You see more of that than I do. That's interesting to hear that.
To me, it's almost like if someone did write a novel now in the past tense.
I'm going back to past tense.
That would be exciting and cutting edge.
I'm going back to past tense.
Unique.
I'm in. I'm going to open another drawer and get another tool out. Past tense tool.
I'm deliberately being provocative. I'm just what I really wanted to ask you though, which is certainly more important. You were talking about print versus digital. Number one, I don't think we've pinned down the actual reasons behind this. You talk about advertising, you talk about readership, but why is print still so popular in the digital age?
Yeah, I sidetracked myself. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for putting me back, Will. Just to finish off briefly, so that's the print thing. We also publish digitally, the print stories, but we also write separate stories for e-travel, which is a digital edition. And I write the stories for those, and they're shorter, sharper, different style of writing, probably a newsier style of writing in terms of, our media. But it feels different. Get to the point, get in there, bullet points even, break up paragraphs,
Does the West still have a digital first policy? Is that right?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. But, they're largely print stories going digital first. But I think that's slightly different to writing style for digital.
Okay.
Which, I think that we've now got, half a dozen stories or so in e-travel, which are digital style stories, rather than just using print stories. I say shorter, sharper, bit more light shining through them. You don't have the time to explain or expand in the same way. The print thing, it's interesting, isn't it? There is that. There's this old school thought that when you put in our case soy ink on paper, there is that sort of enigmatic, kerygmatic moment, creative moment when something tangible happens and a thing has a physical life. I mean, I come from a bit of that. I can, as an editor, we've been talking about me as a writer. As an editor, I can edit a story, we go on screens, obviously, blah, 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 blah. And as soon as you print it, you see a spelling mistake, you go, how did that happen? Everyone's read this thing 6 times, and as soon as you print it, your eye drops straight on it, and you go, really? It's weird. So print is still weird to me that can happen. And there is a value in it. There's a value to a physical book that I still feel. This is just me, and there'll be other people reading Kindles and whatever. But if you really love a book in Kindle, as a digital book, don't you want a real one on the shelf? I do, anyway. In terms of the travel thing and other forms of print media, like mass media, I had it explained to me by a young media buyer. So these are people who place a lot of advertising for travel companies. So if you're a travel company, you say, I'm going to spend $5 million on advertising this year, but they're busy doing their travel thing, so they get a media buyer to buy the ads. And this fine young chap with his ponytail in Sydney explained to me that what happens in print is like a medieval marketplace where everyone comes to buy and everyone comes to sell, sort of with the same intent in the same place. It's brilliant. He's explaining all this to me. So, and I was interested because he kind of really saw it in this as if it was a light bulb moment for him that coming to something in print, you are a participant in a different way. Okay. We talk about engagement, audience engagement, but there's a willingness, there's a community in a different way. I see it here, this Readers' Weekend. Just only nice people come. Everyone comes with good intent. Everyone chats. It's like we've been here for how many hours, and it feels like we're all just best friends. And I think that there is a sort of, to me, there is still a community and a family and something that grows out of print, which is different. Maybe it's the wood.
What you're describing, it's you're almost describing a mystical experience, aren't you? That's what it sounds like to me. You're not pinning it on like statistics or science. It's all this magical sort of moment.
It does. Wow.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Perhaps when we have questions later on, we could hear from the readers themselves and find out why they think they prefer to read in print.
I'd love to.
Just before we leave the subject of print versus digital, you kind of touched on this, but that idea that does one actually write differently if they know it's going to be print first than when they know it's going to be digital first, or heaven forbid, digital only? Is there an actual difference
I think
in the
it's a
writing?
different style. Yeah, I do think
I know you've touched on this already with the bullet points and the sharpness and so forth.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, if you're sitting down to write a story, do you have to have that in your mind right from the beginning?
Yes and no. It's the best answer ever, isn't it? No, I don't mean yes and no. I think there's two approaches. I think you're either going to be... I'm oversimplifying this, but let me just say it. You're either going to take a sort of journeyman approach. You know, writing is a craft. I'm a craftsman, tradesman perhaps. I've got all these tools. You want a piece for digital? I'll write you a 250 word piece for digital. You want a 2,000 word story for print? I'll write you that. You know, whatever it is, I'll write in that style. And I'm really keen on the fact that when we go digital only, we write in that style. You know, you pick up a style and you just smash it in there, bang, done. There's this amorphous ground in between, as you say, where it's digital first, but it's actually a print story, you know, is written for print. So that's slightly different. I mean, I don't think you could. I think really it's a print story that's going online, basically. So that's what that is. But I think there's another approach, and I do this myself, and I do suggest that writers here might think about this twice. I always write one piece on every trip I do, which is not for publication. Because particularly perhaps for me, for Will, you know, practiced writers who've been doing this a long time. I mean, you know the techniques, and to be honest, you know the tricks as well, you know. So I can knock out a story that'll get me home and get it done, sort of thing. And I know what fits where and how to turn it up because of this toolbox. So, you know, that means that you can be writing into pigeonholes very easily. Whatever you want, I can kind of give you. I'm not being smart, but, you know. So to write a story that's not for publication, suddenly there's no pigeonhole, there's no parameters, there's no rules. You're just writing. There's no particular length, so you don't have the same preconception of trajectory, which I'm sure Will has or will touch upon, you know, which is so important to writing. So kind of all that goes out the window, all those stylistic things go out the window because you're just writing not for publication, you're just writing a piece of stuff. I mean, almost invariably it's my favourite story from the trip, and almost invariably it's the first one that gets published, you know. So it's a pathetic little trick that I'm not falling for anymore, but I am really. So, you know, writing for nowhere breaks that. Is it digital? Is it print? Am I using this technique, that technique, this length, that length?
There's a kind of anxiety there, isn't there?
Well, I think there's an anxiety. There can be a complacency.
Right.
Because you just, you know, it's like when you watch, you know, great sports people who can put a ball exactly there or wherever you want it. You know, they can do it over and over again, or a great musician who can play you Bach over and over and over again exactly the same. You know, I'm not saying I'm that, but that's sort of what you do as a working writer who's writing a couple of thousand words a day. So to just try and break all that and say there's no rules is you know, it's good for you. So that's a counterpoint. So some of the stories, I don't think about where it's going to go or what's going to happen to it, whether it's print or anything else. I'm just writing stuff. Yeah.
I think one area where there are rules is in the area of ethics, and we had a brief discussion earlier on about when you're on an assignment, more often than not supplied by a particular travel company or a, you know, cruise company or so forth, is there this obligation that you write a positive story? Or if you see certain aspects of the society, and I'm thinking about India or Vietnam, which we've talked about earlier in our classes, where there is very clearly a lot of issues that can't be ignored. As a travel writer, do you ignore them, or do you actually address them, but in a way that is ethical and that is balanced, so that you address the needs of your partners and the needs of your readers and the needs of the people you're writing about?
Wow, okay. This is going to be a slightly big answer. You'll have to keep pulling me back to the question if I get lost. Firstly, yes, lots of the trips are where I'm invited to come upon, to come on. So, firstly, to say that any story that is written under that sort of umbrella will have a disclaimer on the end, which I change all the time. So I'm very conscious of this. It used to say this story has not been seen or approved by blah blah blah. We now say it's not been influenced or seen by, because there's undercurrent of influence, which of course is a more modern way of approaching these things. So I'm totally conscious of that. What the practicalities, let me just tell you about that, is that you'll have a department of some company which is going to put on what they call a familiarisation or a famil, and invite writers on in markets that they want to hit and blah, blah, blah. So it's not just like a free holiday. They want something out of it. Their job is to fulfil those spots and get the right people. So, for us, it's time. So if I'm going to send someone away or I'm going to go away, it's time. So we have, some skin in the game, I suppose. So that's that. Then there's another person, other team which will run the actual trip, who might be on the trip with the writers and so on. And then there's someone else somewhere which will account for it, and see whether it was worth sending these people or not. And they're generally disconnected. So what I'm saying to you is that if we just take the 22 years as travel editor of the West Australian and now the Sunday Times, I've never once been only once, been called to account, like, nothing much came out of this or didn't come out of this. So we only take assignments, as I still call them, if we want lots from it. If I'm interested in the area, and I say no to lots of assignments because I don't think they're relevant to our readers, or I don't really have. I'm cautious in saying this. I might not have confidence in some companies. I don't have confidence in, so I don't want to be travelling and be seen to be connected or promoting them in any way, or endorsing them, I should say, in any way. Other companies, I don't know, I don't have the experience of. So we travel with a lot of companies, and the reason that we do what we've said is because if it's a touring company or a cruise company or whatever it is, I want to know how they operate. I mean, there are companies that I won't travel with again because I don't really want you to travel with again, frankly. So we only know that if we travel with them, So there's good reasons for doing this too. So, you're seeing that it's quite a complicated picture already. If we then do a trip, there's different ways the trip can be bad. You can have a bad night in a hotel or a bad meal or something goes wrong. Well, we all have bad days, right? And you can turn up and there's no one there and the lock doesn't work and So, there's that stuff which can be sort of ephemeral because someone's just having, it's like, I'm sure we've all had days when nothing else can possibly go wrong, and then someone turns up and that goes wrong as well, and you go like, really, I might as well just shut the door and go home because, So I'm conscious that can happen, and the 300 days before it and the 64 after it will be fine, So the one moment that you're there, and particularly as a writer, as a journalist, is going to be the moment when everything goes wrong for a hotel, right? Hotel in India, we turn up, general manager says, we're up on a hill, 5-star hotel, general manager says, there's no water. I said, what do you mean there's no water? He says, there's no water, the pumps have gone. I said, well, when it's going to get fixed? And he just nods his head and walks away. Well, we're there for 3 nights. So that's a bit different, So, but equally, I mean, it's never happened before and probably never happen again. So how do you put that into, how does that work? I mean, it's a fantastic hotel, which has just had like the worst catastrophe ever. So, I'll talk about it, but in that context, you can gather from what I'm saying. There are other situations where Cambodia, orphanages, children with parents put into the orphanage as a way to attract donations. I don't know how many times I've written that story, and I'll continue to write that story. So, absolutely, and you go to this place and you go, well, this is just kind of money harvesting, and I've continued to write about that story over many years, and now for example, in Siem Reap, there's local laws now. They're really trying to shut all these places. They have been, and they are successfully shutting these places down and imposing rules on them. So, absolutely. There was a case where I went on a trip with a very good company, which I know them all very well. They've done fantastic community-style holidays, trips in South America, Africa. I went on one again in Cambodia. It was absolutely awful. I mean, it was just a nightmare. So I rang them up. I got back, rang them up and said, look, I've written this story, but this is what happened. And I know the guy who put it. I went through it, and he said, that sounds terrible. I said, yeah, well, it was terrible. And he literally got on a plane that day, went up there, rang me the next day. So I'm seeing all the providers here and all the people we deal with. Rang me the next day and said, I can't convince myself that I can solve all these problems, that you're right. And they pulled the itinerary. That was it. So I didn't publish the story because it might leave you as a reader with the idea that, oh, these things are all a scam. Well, they're not. I mean, the other ones are fantastic and they've had an amazing effect on communities. But this one was. So there are sometimes some things we do behind the scenes, is what I'm saying. Yeah. But in terms of just saying that something's bad or good, albeit putting it in perspective, whatever happens, happens,
So I guess I can see that perspective, but I think I was probably leading more towards, a full experience. For example, you're in New Delhi, you're being driven between one luxury hotel and another. What you see in between is in very sharp contrast to those experiences. Sure. And they're going to be the experiences of everyone else who goes there. Sure. How could you not even mention that? That's my point.
Absolutely mention that. I mean, one of the things, India is such a, it's the place that's probably closest to my heart and where I've spent a lot of time since 1978. And people, wow, we're going to India. Oh, it's such a rich, it's a rich place, isn't it? In terms of culture. Oh, but the poverty. You go, well, already this is confusing, isn't it? We've got rich, poor. We've got all these words going on. Absolutely. Look, I write it all together as the answer. Sometimes you just write what you see in the order you see it. Really conscious of that, and as you say, you don't want to be isolated from the experience, and you can be. A lot of packaged travel can isolate you into this little luxury world. But how do you break that? I don't know. It's an interesting question. If you're on something like that, you just got to walk out of the hotel and walk down the road and do that stuff yourself, I suppose. I mean, I do that. And that's all part of the story for me. There are also, you have to be, I suppose, I hope I'm not rambling. Am I rambling?
No, not at all.
I suppose also, you're aware that there are lots of different readers who are reading for different readers. Some readers don't want to see anything like that anyway. They just want the kind of luxury experience in India. But we write, I certainly write 1,000 words a day, and as I say, in the present tense and every day. So there's lots of opportunity. And I don't want to separate, I'm thinking aloud now, I don't want to separate the luxury story from the real life on the street story, because I want them to interact and intertwine. But then I can also drill further into them separately in their own ways, have more detail in them, because there'll be lots of stories and moments. But I don't think I'm blind to anything. And the more I can blend them all together and write about the contrast of, and I have written about the contrast of being in this weird, luxurious world often full of very wealthy people, and local people, and then you step outside and go, well, how does this work? Because there's people out here with no legs on a little wooden cart begging, this place is nuts, and that is the contrast and the challenge of India in particular as well for me. I like that. I like the complexity. I find the complexity very relaxing. So, that is, I do fear, a rambling answer, but you can see.
No, it's a good one.
It's reflective of the struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
no
no
actual
easy
answer.
answer. No, you're right.
There's actually no answer, but I think the answer is that you carry on struggling with it all and including it all and trying to balance it all up.
Oh, that is an answer of sorts. So,
Of sorts.
Look, I got one last question, if I may, before we open it up to the floor. I wanted to ask you about another aspect of your work that is intertwined, which is the fiction and the non-fiction, because clearly they both draw so much on each other. Particularly the fiction does, I think, draw heavily on your own experiences as a travel writer. So to get from that point to being a novelist, for example, which is a whole different kettle of fish, I'm sure, in many ways.
Yeah, it is. There's a great Chris Christopherson song lyric. I'm a walking contradiction, partly truth and partly fiction. I think I'll have that on my gravestone. The fiction, there's different. You know better than me. There's different aspects and styles of fiction. So if we take, say, the two novels that are set in the Kimberley, Other Country and As the River Runs. Other Country, particularly, which was the first novel, you kind of need, in the Australian vernacular, you need a 44-gallon drum of fact, and you need to put it on a little bushfire and simmer it and simmer it and simmer it and reduce it, to use a cooking analogy, and reduce it into something more viscous. And you end up with something in the bottom which is slippery and viscous. This is the writing that you want. It's dense, and all of that fact is somehow reduced into this fiction, this 70,000 words, 70-odd thousand words. So for me, there's far more research in fiction than there is in non-fiction, for example. Everything has to be right. So, if you start with geography, chronology, geology, whatever you like, but certainly if you've got to get the geography right, that the distance between places, you've got to get the chronology right, that this is how the characters progress through. All those things have to be absolutely bulletproof, spot on, and they can't change, because if you're going to float, and then, what people, obviously the language, the dialogue, what they're wearing, what they're driving, how they butcher a beast over the back of the tray of a ute, and the cuts they make, and everything has to be correct. The saws, the different types of saw you find in the shed, and the tooth they've got on them, and where they come from, and what they use them from, and how they made. The windmill man used to make bearings out of this wooden bearings for the windmills on the stations, and they soaked the bearings, these hardwood bearings, in the oil of that tree, and they'd last for 100 years. So all of this stuff has to be spot on. If you're then going to talk about two brothers locked in this nasty recurring male family history, a horrible old man and his dad, and why he was like he is, and the prospect, the proposition or the possibility that one of them can break out of that. One of them can't. Is he going to get just dragged into and stuck in it? If you're going to get into all that, then the backdrop to that has to be correct. Because as soon as you've got something wrong, you go, hold on a minute, he did this. And as soon as there's a break in this belief that you're building up in the reader, you kind of you've lost the game. So, and that is just a very long, slow process. I mean, Other Country took me 9 years. My wife says it was long though, but I'm doubtless she's right. So, because she's always right. So that took me 9 years, and the important thing, and I'll say to all the writers here, the important thing for me and perhaps for you, is to have. I used to say was to write every day, but is to have contact with that project, with that work every day. So you might just be sitting waiting for a train, and you get it out and think about it. Get out in your head and think about it. Have contact with it every day, and it keeps running. As soon as I break that pattern, it goes. I actually wrote that, but I actually wrote that every day for 9 years. And I mean every day, wherever I was, whatever I was doing. And it was just a arm wrestle, particularly because, it became very complicated because of some of the people who were part of the conglomerates of characters, and it was just a massive thing for me. So I thought I'd have another go. So then I was interested. That book is set, and I'm interested in landscape and interaction with landscape. It's set in the Kimberley before conservation, tourism, Indigenous ownership, really, it was set really before Brahmins came in, still sort of in short horns, before, proper fencing, different style of cattle management, very much in the old kind of cowboy days when they just up in choppers chasing them and riding horses and da-da-da. My first experience in the Kimberley was riding horses, mustering cattle with Indigenous ringers, so that's something else. So, and I only got the job because I could ride a horse, so brilliant. So I was interested then, As the River Runs is set 20 years later, you do see the younger brother crop up and find out what happened to him, which was fun. But it's set, in our modern world where the Gibb River Road, the first time I drove the Gibb River Road both ways, I saw 4 vehicles, and we stopped and got out and had a chat sort of thing. And now there's like 400 a minute sort of thing. So I was interested in, so it's set in tourism, conservation, the great conservation sways with the Australian Wildlife Conservancy right up towards Munja even, and Indigenous ownership and so on and so forth. So the same place, but having gone through this shift. And the same process then for 7 years, because perhaps getting better, or quicker, I don't know.
One could say it flowed better.
Yeah, maybe. One could say that. I had more idea of trajectory, of structure.
Right, okay.
So I didn't have so much re-editing to go back. Anyone here who's writing a novel, if I can give you one trick, when you've finished it, is to edit it backwards. Take the last 10, if it's a 70,000 word thing, which is ballpark 70, 80,000, whatever a novel is for you, take the last 10,000 words and do a really nice close word edit on them. Then the 10,000 words before, the 10,000 words before, come back that way. And you will be amazed when you then read it, you'll go zzz, and you're on the last full stop. Because if you always start at the beginning and begin to read it, you'll just follow this same sort of progression as you began with. And if you break that by coming in these sections forward, you will be, I can pretty well promise you, you'll be amazed at the effect that has on your work.
Wow. That's quite a formidable way in which to end this part of the conversation, but I think we ought to. We've got a little bit more time left. Does anyone have any questions? And if you do, can I please ask a favour that you just sort of come up here and I hold this microphone up to you so that we can hear you clearly on the podcast?
Great. First question. Let's go. Make it hard.
Let's do it.
This is a very easy question. When you said about to use your iPhone or your phone, Samsung, or whatever, sorry, I shouldn't mention the names, but to write your stories, do you type them with a keypad or do you use a pen to write it?
No, good question. I like practical questions. No, I do use an iPhone. Doesn't matter to me what it is really. I use an iPhone, and I just use the Notes, which is a simple format in which every iPhone comes with, I think. Look, whether it's a Samsung, which Will uses, or whatever.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of the Samsung with the stylus.
Yeah.
But you can convert those into type text now anyway very easily. So
within that, I have a folder which says, well, I can read down them here: Ethiopia, India 2018, India 2023, blah blah blah. So I've got a folder in there. I've got a writing folder, I've got a research folder, I can chuck stuff in, PDFs, pictures, anything else, notes, blah, blah, blah. Sorry. I've also got my tickets, flight tickets, airline tickets, under travel arrangements. But here, in writing, I've got my stories that I'm writing as I'm in India. And I just type those with my two thumbs. No. I bought a Bluetooth keyboard, a little fold-out one. Never used it. So I kind of, because you're just sitting there in a plane I don't want to need something else. I want to be able to write it. So, we leave Jaipur in the amber after dawn light, easing into a warming morning and a sky clearing sort of to a delicate china blue filtered through grey on the expressway from Jaipur, blah, blah, blah. And then I've gone signs on the roadside, cosy underwear, hotel highway, build safe, Ashok Leyland, blah, blah, blah. Veg restaurant, pure veg restaurant, non-veg restaurant, literally next door. Signs on vehicles, blow horn, wait for side, use dipper at night, highly inflammable. Roam like a bird, don't copy my style. Trucks are highly decorated, painted yellow, covered in art and inspiring slogans. Pom-poms dangling off the windows, blah, 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 blah. Women in cerise, women in yellow, women in scarlet, men in dark baggy pants with neatly laundered white shirts. I mean, I couldn't remember or recreate that even that evening. And I'm just sitting in the back of the bus with my two thumbs on the keyboard. Yeah.
He's written the blah, blah, blah in there as well, by the way.
Yeah.
I can see it in
blah,
there.
blah, blah, blah. So honestly, that's just, for me, it's gold, because I couldn't do that even that evening in that detail.
So do you feel like it really has supplanted the physical notebook in that respect? It's your phone is always on you, basically.
Yeah, it sort of has. So I carry the notebook, which I still have with me here.
As you were saying.
I carry the notebook and I use it for shorthand, but less and less and less.
Possibly in the same way the phone camera has supplanted the real camera?
Yes.
So that's another story.
No, it's a real story. If I was going to interview someone, I would definitely be doing shorthand with a notebook.
Yeah, sure.
Because you can't beat a selective note. I don't want to listen to the whole interview again. And I don't want to use Otter and have a transcription. I just want the selective. Most people, a lot of people do this. They'll go, you go, oh, here we go, because the thing is, oh, here we go, he just worked out what he wants to say, and then I write that down, and then they go, the thing is, I think there's such and such, great, okay. They go, off you go, and the thing is, oh, here we go again, so I end up with about 3 pages of notes, shorthand notes from a 2-hour conversation. And without all those long transitions where someone's working out, taking themselves to the next point, which is probably what I've been doing for the last hour. So you'd end up with 2 pages of notes. So just a selection of notes. So I would use it for that.
Yeah.
The phone camera, yes, I'm confident to just use the phone camera on assignments.
Well, you heard it here today, live.
Yeah. I still take cameras, and I know I'm never going to get them out of the bag. But anyway, moving on.
Thank you. Great question.
Yeah,
Who's next?
Two thumbs. I used to prod it with my forefinger, but it's a bad look. So.
Come on.
We've got a hard question. That was an easy question. Come on. I did have. Oh, great. Andre, step up.
Andre, step up.
Step up, Andre.
Another relatively easy question. So yesterday at dinner, someone was saying they carry your clippings all around when they and they cut it out and they carry it on their travels. With the West travel section online, do you still need to do that, or can you retrieve key stories and facts from the online version?
Yep. Thank you, Andre. Good question. Yes, all the stories are published online. But, it's interesting, isn't it? One of the differences between print and digital is that barring the kind folk who keep clippings, which I'm very grateful for, generally you do us the courtesy of sticking what we've done in the recycling, and off it goes again. So you actually clear out the backlog and off it goes, and we start again and do another one next week, which is great because you sort of start with a clean slate, so bar the few clippings that are kept. The issue with digital is sort of managing it, because everything goes online, and nothing actually goes away. So a lot of it, might get out of date is obviously one thing. But then just finding stories is sometimes quite difficult just because of the volume. But the answer is that everything is online. And yes, you could find that. But it's an interesting question, isn't it? If you cut and paste a bit and stick it in your phone, does that mean as much to you as carrying a clipping around for a while? I don't know. That hangs in the air. The answer is you can find the stories online. The stories are online. They're generally with the West Australian, as with most of the sort of major publishers, they're behind a paywall, so you'll pay $1 or something or other for it. But I do hear a lot that people carry around clippings and keep bits of newspaper in the back of their purse and follow itineraries or suggestions that we've put, which is, the trust in that is always something that I'm very grateful for. Thank you, Andre.
That relates to your earlier observation that perhaps physical print means more than digital. Now you're talking about clippings and people carrying around clippings, and does it have more meaning? Because you mentioned the word, is it more meaningful?
Is it more meaningful? I think that's just an open question. Is it more meaningful? And what indeed is meaningful?
What is meaning?
What is meaning? We're going to leave that there. Kaz, you're going to... Please. Oh, here's yours. Really? Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, are you at all concerned about the encroachment of AI into travel?
AI, machine learning, as my son would prefer that I call it, because he's in that.
He is more correct in that.
He's more correct, yeah. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, such a subject for artists and writers, of course. And if you have, not me, if you have enough volume online, certainly that can be mimicked by AI, so someone can write in your style. Am I worried about it? Look, I was worried that print had it 30 years ago, and I'm still worried about that. AI is a game changer, but I do look. I'm not exactly the right person to answer this, but I do suspect that a lot of the machine learning, the force of it and the impact of it will be kind of back end. Will be researchers using AI to do lots of massive functions. It's not necessarily about writing stories, travel stories, and so on. It can be used in that way. Whether a reader can detect it or not, I honestly don't know. I hope not. But whether given 2, 3, 4 years, whether you can pick an AI story from one of my stories written in my style, I have no idea. All I know is that I believe in connection. I believe in honesty. I believe in truth. I believe in trust and responsibility and all these things. And I believe in the human sense of that, that I have to believe that, I want to believe that another human being will know that I'm here talking to them. I don't know whether I'm right or not. I do know that I'd rather run a bad picture of a hotel room taken by, not that my colleagues do, I'd rather run whoops, I've got 2 colleagues here. I don't mean that quite like that. Or a bad picture that I've taken of a hotel room, they got out of jail, than a publicity picture of a hotel room, which is not the room I've stayed in. you know, or is even the room that I've stayed in thoroughly lit by a professional photographer, which has taken all day to take a beautiful picture of this room. I'd rather you saw my picture. And I think as readers, you know that this is the room I stayed in as I saw it, rather than some glitzy version of it, the same room. So somewhere in all that, I guess there's probably more hope than fact. I don't know what's going to happen. At the moment, I think it's still at the play stage for that aspect of machine learning. And I do think that the commercial end of it, there's so much money, there's so much saving in using machine learning, as say, for those big tasks in medical research and everything else, that's where the money will go and that's where it will develop. And I think the can people paint like Picasso thing is probably just a blip that will sort of vanish as the big money goes into pushing the back end. But that's just a guess. I hope not. It's not going to bother me. I'm going to keep going anyway. I don't care. They can do what they like. It's a very interesting future, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are two aspects. Sorry, Megan. There are two aspects of this. There's a creative side that you mentioned, then there's the back-end side, which is the research. And I'm not ashamed to say I use it extensively for research when I'm doing my music criticism, for example, and or I'm writing liner notes for, a CD or something like that. Particularly with something called, is it Notebook LM, the new Google? Because all that does is use what you put in there. It doesn't scour the web. So it's not going to get stuff wrong because you're putting in documents that you're using for research, and it helps you to find correlations and relationships depending on your prompts. And it really speeds up the research process, and you can trust that because it's only what you've put in there. It's not grabbing random stuff that could be out of date or incorrect and so forth. So I'm kind of quite agnostic about it. I think creatively I'm dead set against it for a lot of the reasons you've cited, but I think for the back end stuff, it is a game changer. It's amazing. Sorry, Megan.
Good answer, Will. Thanks. Thanks for coming.
This is for both of you.
Megan.
Yes, hello. What have you found to be the most challenging aspect of writing?
Well, Will, you first. Let's hear from you. I'm sick of hearing from me.
Well, actually, we covered this in one of our classes this morning, and it is the most challenging aspect for me of writing is being absolutely aware of what the house style, what we call the house style is for a particular publication, being aware of what the audience is and modifying your writing. And you've said this before, as a workman-like approach, you can write whatever you need to write. But that is quite challenging for me because the instinct is to write as you want to write. And you say, well, hang on a second, this is not appropriate to this or that publication. So the challenge for me is being aware of that and constraining myself whilst being aware at the same time that this is actually not how I would normally write under different circumstances. Does that automatically make it inauthentic or not? That is the moral conundrum. So that's my answer. Which is not really an answer.
No, it's a good answer. It sounded great. I don't want to sound like some highfalutin smart aleck, which like is always it's always a pretty good precursor to sounding like a highfalutin smart aleck, isn't it? But in all honesty, and I'm always honest, it's not writing. The hardest part of writing for me would be not writing. It's just painful. Not writing every day, not writing 1,000 words, not having that flow is just paralysis and pain for me. So the hardest part of writing is not writing. And I know that sounds like there's nothing about writing that I don't love. And Megan works with me every day and sees that a fair amount of the working day is answering 300 emails and, putting headlines on pages and worrying about this and payments and God no, all the stuff that goes with it all. So writing for me is just bliss, and the only hard part of writing would be not writing.
Now, this is the difference between me and you, because I would rather do anything than write. I'd rather sit there and do absolutely nothing.
No.
And that's why I'm not as good a writer or craftsman as you are. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. I find it incredibly difficult. So it's another thing I find difficult to actually just sit down and write.
Really?
Honestly, all these years later, I still find it one of the hardest things in the world. You know, I'd rather avoid it. I'd rather do anything else but actually sit down and write the goddamn piece.
Wow, I'm silenced by that. I never knew that about you.
Well,
We've been friends for so long and worked together for so long. I must be a good editor because I never even picked that up.
I'm driven by fear and anxiety to get it right for you every time. No, look, it's a valid point because I'm sure some of you feel the same way as I do. Sometimes you just want to avoid it at all costs because it's hard. You don't know what to do, and I think it's fair to own up to that. But you've got such a depth of experience, but also that idea that you find it physically painful not to write is just amazes me. I just can't imagine what that's like.
Yeah, I'm deadly serious about it. For anyone who has trouble like that, my suggestion, just sit down and start typing. Just sit down and start typing. See what comes out, you know. Oh, we have well, the questions are coming now. Here we go. We've got to run on.
How can an inexperienced travel writer get their work published?
Okay. Shall I? There are fewer avenues for it, really, for paid work than there were. In a sense, you're asking the wrong person because I don't know how freelance travel writers survive, or they're amazing. You know, I have a few people who've written for us as contributors for a long, long time. Steve McKenna, who lives in the UK, is the perfect example, who will come up with ideas himself. So generally as a freelancer or a contributor, for a start, let me just say this, he knows exactly what we do. He's really studied the style, the publications, the length, all those practical things. He knows what I want and you know, he kind of knows the timing, how much in terms of volume. So part of it's to do with that. I mean, people who contact me and say, I mean, they've obviously never seen what we do and made no effort to see what we do or the style of what we do or something else, you know, and sending me a 3,000 word story on Bendigo or something, I mean, you know, it's a bit of a pointless exercise all round. So the first thing I say is if you're looking at trying to be published, be it on a website or in print or whatever it is really familiarise yourself with their style, the length, what they do. And you can do that by just sort of mimicking the stories. So if there is a 3,000 story on try writing a 3,000 word story on, now I've got to be careful, Bunbury, you know, for example, in the same sort of style, you know, and just sort of practice, see where their heads are. So just be mindful of what publications do. And also, I mean, you know, a weekender story in Fiji or this or that, you know, people send me from the eastern states. Oh, you know, I thought you'd be interested in this overnighter in Auckland. You go, well, no, because we're not in Sydney. So, you know, make sure you're on point with it. Make sure you're on style with it. And really then, whether it's a website or not, most people in these working positions are so madly busy that what you actually, I don't like the word busy, but I'll tell you that in a moment. What you want is something that fits, and they might just go, yeah, that's great because I can use it. You know, I want JPEGs, about 2 megs, da da da. So try and familiarise yourself in the way that you deliver it. I know all that sounds nastily practical, but it's a good start. And then, you know, just try, just keep trying. Look, I'm going to sweeping statement, or I think most websites sort of just don't pay for content. So, you know, I mean, we do pay contributors, but a small amount. But we are staffed, you know, there's Megan, Penny, Mogens, there was Will until he disloyally just dumped us and walked out of the door in high dudgeon, never to be seen again. and Leanne, who's also here around. So we are fully staffed. So we're sort of expected to be very productive and don't take too much. But I'm always interested in someone else's aspect, you know. And there's one lady who, she was 70, as I'm going to say 70, and she'd been on a coach tour. She'd been a cleaner in hospitals all her life and lived in a little unit in Yeoman. And she sent me this perfect travel story. It was amazing. And I rang her up and said, you know, like, how come you've never... She said, I've never written anything before. And I went, like, really? And it was just this perfect story. And I said, well, if you've got anything else, you know, because she was 70 on a coach tour with, you know, like a big coach and different place every night sort of type of coach tour, which is not something that's not my bracket, you know, kind of thing. So it was another person's view. And I said, oh, well, you've got any more stories? She said, oh, well, I go on holiday every 4 years. So if I go on holiday in 4 years' time, I'll send you another story. I said, all right. And that's 4 years' time. I swear to you, she sent me this perfect travel story. And it's like, I said, have you been? No, I haven't done anything in between. Just, you know, just popped out. And honestly, every 4 years, she'd send me a story. I went round and had a cup of tea with her one morning just because I was so interested. And that her story, I say, was that she'd left school as a 16-year-old or something and just been, not just been, and had been, you know, sort of support and cleaning and whatever in hospitals and this and that. And just write this perfect travel story every once. And I took it because it was something I couldn't have written. Megan couldn't have written because it was, you know, from her. So I am looking, you know, hopefully other editors are looking out for other points of view, which may be a phrase that you hear from Will over the next over this period too.
I'm intrigued by that story because doesn't it sound like the perfect scenario for a short story for anybody who wants to write that? You know, there's this woman sending...
Oh, damn, good idea.
4 years.
Yeah.
Every 4 years you receive this perfect travel story.
That's right.
It's quite intriguing, isn't it?
She was intriguing. She was a very nice, simple down, you know, that all sounds a bit derogatory. She was a very lovely person who just didn't write, except once every 4 years.
Sounds a bit like me.
Apparently, yeah. Apparently.
Okay, well, look, I think we should wrap up just ahead of afternoon tea. I hope you've got a lot out of that conversation. Don't forget, tomorrow the entire travel team will be available to answer your more practical travel questions and so forth. Yeah. But for now, and don't forget to write. Very good.
To write.
So please join me in thanking Stephen Scourfield.
Thanks. Thank you all.